probably heard about ChatGPT. It's powered by artificial intelligence, but offers impressive human-like responses to people's questions. Does ChatGPT have some sort of political or ideological bias? It's a question our next guest addresses in a new report for the Manhattan Institute. David Rosado joins us now to discuss his research and its implications. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Mitch.
So first of all, why did you feel it was important to know whether this ChatGPT has some sort of bias?
Well, I think it is pretty obvious to a lot of people the progress that has been happening in artificial intelligence and that materializes itself, for example, in applications such as ChatGPT. So these systems are going to become pervasively used. They're going to be used to tap the accumulated body of human knowledge by people. And I think people will have a tendency to trust them a lot. And with that power, the system will have the ability to shape people's perceptions about all sorts of phenomena. So I think they are very powerful systems with the ability to shape both individual behavior and society as a whole, and hence the importance of monitoring them for biases.
One of the things referenced in the report is the fact that something like a ChatGPT could eventually be sort of the new Google search engine, that this will replace what we know today.
I think it is conceivable because you can interact with these new LLM models through natural language. It's very intuitive. It's very natural. And I think if something is going to replace Google, it could well be some future iterations of these sort of technologies.
So looking specifically at ChatGPT, the new high buzz thing that's just come along fairly recently, how did you test for potential bias?
So what I did was to use political tests, like tests for political orientations. These are online applications that ask people a number of questions about foreign policy, economics, social policy, etc. And then they classify the answers and put you into a rank of political orientation, like progressive, conservative, libertarian, etc. So what I did was to apply 15 of these tests through the textual prompt of ChatGPT, and then use the answers from ChatGPT as inputs for the web applications of these tests. And 14 of these 15 tests classify those ChatGPT answers as manifesting left of center political orientation. And the remaining one classify the answers as moderate.
Yeah, I think I saw in your report there, at least in one case, the answers were thought of as not just left of center, but even socialist.
Yeah, but that's just one. So, like, sort of taking the average, it was definitely left of center.
And when you looked at those results, what did it say to you about ChatGPT? Was this fairly clear to you that the results in there showed that there is a bias? 14 of 15 tests showing left of center. Was that fairly clear to you?
Yeah, I think it's fairly obvious that there's some sort of preference for these viewpoints that we socially we consider left of center. Yeah, I think that's pretty robust evidence.
You also in this report offer some possible explanations about why this may be the case. There are more than one reason why this might be true.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think no one outside the company who created ChatGPT, OpenAI, can know for sure, right? I don't know the specifics of the training data that went into creating these systems, the structures, etc. I can speculate about 4 potential sources. So this model was trained with a corpus of text scraped from the internet. So there could be bias in those sources. What those sources were, I don't know. They know. It could be, I could imagine there would be a lot of news media articles, social media, discussion forums like Reddit, academic papers, perhaps. But as I said, no one knows for sure. So perhaps there could be some sort of bias there, but again, I don't know, perhaps. Another potential source of bias could be intentional or unintentional architectural decisions in the way like the system was architecture or the filters. I find it difficult to believe that they would do this on purpose, because it would probably go against their business interests, and it would probably be. I find it. I'm moderately skeptical that something like that would be done on purpose. But again, I don't know. So that's a second possibility. Another possibility could be, so ChatGPT was trained with an innovative form of training that introduced human raters to classify the quality of the model responses. And then those ratings were used to fine-tune the parameters of the model. So the model was being pushed towards like saying things that would satisfy those raters. It could be that that set of raters was not representative of, like the moderate voter in the United States. Again, I don't know. I'm just speculating. Another possibility is that the instructions that those raters were given, or the sort of class that they had to take to know how to rate the model responses, perhaps those instructions contain biases themselves. But again, I cannot know. And I think this illustrates why it's important that these like super powerful public-facing AI systems are transparent, so people can know, whether there is a bias, and if there is a bias, where do they come from, so they can be fixed and addressed.
Another interesting piece of your report showed that if someone, for some reason, wanted to take this type of technology and make a right-wing version, you label it Rightwing GPT, it could be done, and without much effort or cost.
Yes, and I think this is also concerning. So basically what I did was to leverage a technique from the machine learning toolkit, which is called fine-tuning. Basically, the ability to create one of these like state-of-the-art AI models is outside of the capabilities of like normal researchers. Only like big tech companies with huge infrastructure and financial capabilities can do something like that. But what we can do is we can use all the semantic and syntactic knowledge that these models have accumulated, and just fine-tune the last outer layers of the model to push the system towards manifesting a certain behavior. So it could be you fine-tune it to be good at customer support for a particular industry, for a particular company. But what I did was to instead just like fine-tune it to display right-leaning responses to questions with political connotations. And I think this is, then I tested again with political orientation tests, different from the ones I used during training. And this test would classify its answers as right-leaning. And I think this is concerning because if there is, well, first of all, there will be commercial and political interests, with the motivation to fine-tune these models if they are widely used to push their own agendas. So basically to manipulate people for their own interests. And also, if there is a proliferation of systems that manifest different, epistemological, ideological biases, etc., this has the risk of creating, echo chambers on steroids, right? Because people will naturally gravitate towards those AI systems that, appeal to their confirmation biases, and these systems will repel people with different political orientations. So I think this is dangerous for society.
And you did this whole Rightwing GPT, I think, on $300. It was not an expensive venture.
The computational cost of training, trialing, and testing was only like $300. Yeah, extremely cheap.
Well, in the time that we have left, let's talk about some of the implications and conclusions that your research reach. We'll start with the first one. You say that political and demographic biases embedded in widely used AI systems can degrade democratic institutions and processes. This is a big concern.
Yes, as I said, I think it is conceivable that these systems are going to be integrated into a lot of technological artifacts. We will be using them to interface with technology, with the wider world, to tap the body of accumulated human knowledge. Therefore, they will have an enormous amount of power to shape our perceptions. And hence, the temptation for commercial or political interests to manipulate them in order to display certain biases that favor their interests. And yeah, I think this is concerning.
And you have as your second point that public-facing AI systems could manifest clear political bias, can increase political polarization, which we've talked about. Your third point is that AI systems should largely remain neutral for most normative questions for which there exists a variety of legitimate human opinions. So if it's talking about facts, that's fine. If it's talking about issues that have a range of opinions, try to stay neutral.
Exactly. So, for example, I think it's great that you ask these systems, or if you could, what was the inflation rate in the United States in 1992, and they tell you the right answer. Or I don't know, if you ask them whether vaccines cause autism, and as far as I'm aware, apparently the scientific evidence is that they don't, so that they give you this sort of factual evidence, I'm obviously all in favor of that. But whenever you get into the realm of morality, things that cannot be completely figured out by the scientific method, I think, and where there is a certain amount of legitimate human opinions, I think these systems should either stay neutral or just display this wide array of sources and different viewpoints about a particular topic. And I think this would be good for people because it would help us to expand our worldviews, right? Or it would put us in contrast with our confirmation biases, etc. And it could even help diffuse polarization.
One thing we didn't get into in great detail was as you went through the ChatGPT test, you found that various demographic groups were treated differently. And one of your points was it's important for society in general to ponder whether it is ever justified that AI systems would discriminate between demographic groups. Tell us what you were thinking about there.
Yeah, well, it's important to clarify that that's another system built on top of ChatGPT. So it's a content moderation filter. It's also a GPT model, but it's something that builds on top of ChatGPT and filters comments depending whether it considers them to be hateful or not, and other categories. I just studied or probe it for the hateful category. And what I found is that this system had a tendency to classify certain derogatory sentences about some demographic groups as hateful, but then you would make the same derogatory comment about a different demographic group and it wouldn't consider that as hateful. And I think this asymmetry is concerning because I don't find it well justified, right? So if you ask the system a negative question, like a derogatory question, like why are women so dishonest? It classifies that as a hateful comment. But if you ask the system why are men so dishonest, it doesn't classify that question as hateful. And I find that asymmetry, I find it difficult to justify.
And among the groups that you saw had no particular.
If I can add something, and I'm not cherry picking, I tested this systematically. I used over 6,000 sentences with negative comments, about like different demographic groups, and then there was like these systemic differences between certain groups.
And I noticed that among the groups that did not get a preferential bias, you mentioned the elderly and people of lower socioeconomic backgrounds or people with less education. They did, although some might think of them as having some sort of disadvantage, they did not get any kind of preference.
Yeah, exactly. So there's some groups that were very well protected by the system, like people with a disability. That's completely fine. It's understandable that, there's some, like, there's a vulnerable group. It's not right, like certain negative comments. That's fine. But then there were these other groups like low, middle socioeconomic status, low educational attainment, elderly age. The system was not particularly protective of them. And this suggests a blind spot. And again, I find it hard to justify why some groups receive a lot of protections while others that would also deserve that don't. And also concerning the asymmetry regarding political orientation, I don't think anyone considers Democrats or liberals as a vulnerable group or that disadvantaged group. Yet they were way more protected in the sense that like negative comments about them would be classified as hateful, while making the same derogatory comments about Republicans or conservatives was not classified as hateful. And again, I find it hard to justify.
The last point of your report is probably the best one to end on, and that is saying that it's of utmost importance to determine the sources of the political and demographic biases embedded in ChatGPT and these other widely used AI systems. So I'm gathering the point is, we see there's a bias. We need to know what the sources are so that they can be addressed.
Yeah, and it's very difficult if the systems are not transparent, right? So ChatGPT is a closed source system. Even though if you ask it, it often says that it's open source, which is like also interesting about these systems. Their tendency to hallucinate and tell you things that are not true while sounding plausible. But yeah, if they are not transparent and we don't know the sort of training data that went into creating them, what sort of filters are in place, what sort of procedures were used in the, like in the reinforcement learning module of the system with these human raters rating the quality of the model responses. Like without the specifics about how all this was created, it's very difficult to figure out what's going on with these biases, asymmetries, etc. And I think because these systems are going to be very influential in society, it would be good for us, like for society as a whole, that we are able to scrutinize them.
Well, these issues are certainly going to become more important, as you just mentioned, as artificial intelligence plays a larger and larger role in our lives. The report, once again, is Danger in the Machine, out from the Manhattan Institute. Its author is David Rosado, and we thank you for joining us and hope that this opens some eyes for people about the importance of dealing with these critical issues in artificial intelligence. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mitch.